In the year of our Lord, 2023, Sparkplug Coffee makes a product that's good enough for warrior poets or Scotsmen. It's not free! But these beans are the freshest in Canada, and they're also fairly traded. Premium Arabica beans, in fact. Sparkplug offers you many blends and roasts, and they allow you to mix it up once in a while by offering rotating seasonal blends. For those who don't want a jolt of energy to help you break into a fortress and murder all the dastardly Englishmen you find there, you just want to remain calm, cool, and not so killy, they have decaf and half-calf. It's ironic that I'll be talking about Europeans in this podcast, that they aren't able to enjoy this fine stuff, but Canadians and Americans sure are. Sparkplug delivers to customers in the USA and Canada within a week, and Canadians won't even have to pay for shipping. The real key here, though, is becoming a member. If you're in the Autopilot Coffee Club, not only can you set it and forget it, but you can customize things to get your orders when you actually need them. Need them! You can even cancel or just pause your membership if you're about to go on the warpath in another country and won't be home for a while. Please don't think of this as a coffee of the month type thing. If you do, William Wallace might pull out his sword and scare the shit out of you with it. The blue-faced maniac might even yell, "Yeah!" a few times. Being a member gets you perks and deals, but it also saves you money on every single order. So go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES/ is appropriate for this movie to save 20% off your next order. Our HYES promo code also puts a little money in our pocket, so you're helping your favorite classic movies podcast. Sparkplug is your coffee, just like Ireland is Stephen's Island. Okay, now that we've convinced you to cross one item off your grocery list because you're going to be a member, let's ask Andrew Luther to keyboard us into this episode proper with his theme music. Andrew knows better than anyone that every man dies. Not every man really gets to play a keyboard for a podcast. And action. Have you ever seen Braveheart? And I bet you ever have. I've ever seen it maybe 6 or 7 times by now. It's nearly 3 hours long, but it's well worth the investment of my time, even if I have to take an hour-long break to make dinner and feed the dogs, which I did. And the I in question is Ryan Ellis, the savage host of this podcast. Savage! It's me and me alone today. My wife Bev and I review classic movies on this channel every Monday morning, but every other Friday I do this by myself. Although, note at the end of the podcast, that's going to change a little in April for a pretty good reason. But usually every other Friday, it's me by myself. And if spoilers turn you off, get out of here, because I'm going to do what's become my style with these solo shows. Go through the plot sequentially from the start to the finish. The subject of our 501st episode is Braveheart, and it was released by Paramount, and I think also Fox apparently, but Paramount mostly, on May 24th, 1995. You can't say it was a dud domestically, it broke even, but the film was a hit when you account for worldwide totals. And we should account for those because money is money. That's why they call it money. As for the response to Mel Gibson's Oscar winner, 75% of Rotten Tomatoes critics and 85% of their audiences gave Braveheart a good review. There are 125 reviews by the critics on that site, and the average is 7.2 out of 10. I said this wasn't a smash here at home, but it was 18th at the 1995 U.S. box office. Toy Story was number 1. That was my number 1, also my favorite movie of 95. I've seen it so many times. Apollo 13 was 3rd, should have been 13th, and 7 was 9th, should have been 7th. We've reviewed all those films at one time or another. They're way back in the archive. Some of them are a long way back. Toy Story was on the AFI's Top 100 list, so it's back in 2015, I believe. Braveheart won 5 Oscars. Best Picture, of course, since this is Oscar month, that's why I'm covering it. Mel Gibson, Bruce Davey, and Alan Ladd Jr. were all producers on this, so they all got trophies. Laddie, by the way, was a fascinating guy. Of course, Alan Ladd from Shane, that's his father. He ran Fox, back in the 70s, and was the only studio executive who saw anything in George Lucas's Star Wars script. I don't think he lasted too much longer at Fox after that, though. Some kind of weird dispute. Even though you think they'd make him the boss for life after shepherding a movie that raked in more money than there is in Fort Knox, and then the sequels. But I think he was gone before at least the second sequel, and maybe even before Empire Strikes Back. Back to the Oscars for Braveheart. Mel Gibson won for Best Director. John Toll's cinematography won for the second straight year. He was honored for his beautiful work on Legends of the Fall in 1994. And the makeup team and the sound effects gang also took home gold. It was nominated for 5 more. Randall Wallace's screenplay, Stephen Rosenblum's editing, James Horner's very Scottish music, and also the costumes and the sound. Horner was also nominated for his music for Apollo 13 that same year. I like both scores a lot, but Il Postino, the Postman, not the Kevin Costner one, but the, Italian one, won the statue instead of either of those. James Horner finally won 2 years later for Titanic, and of course he also won for the song in that movie, so he won 2 Oscars in one night. The last thing Mel said in his Best Director speech was, like most directors, I suppose what I really want to do is act. That's a funny line and got a big laugh out of the crowd. Speaking of the crowd, I've noticed in these older Oscar shows that not everyone got a standing ovation the way they seem to now, especially the most famous people like the actors and often the directors. You'd think Mel Gibson might get one, but no. Now, Sidney Poitier did when he came out to present Best Picture. Of course, he was a legend, and maybe people in Hollywood already knew what Mel Gibson was all about. I didn't expect the guys who won for the sound effects or the makeup group to get cheered from every inch of the building, but there wasn't a standing O even when Braveheart won Best Picture. I think for many years now that's just been standard. You're named the best movie of the year by these people, and then these people cheer you on like you're a conquering hero. But not for Braveheart. Why do awards matter? People probably wonder that sometimes. Well, money trumps all. Money is better than all, but awards are a huge factor in what gets made for you to watch. A lot of people think the Oscars are stupid and antiquated. Even if that's true, as long as the show still gets watched by millions of people, and it does, the ratings are down, but they still get a lot of people watching it, and is some kind of determining factor into what the VIPs will greenlight, and it is, then they fucking matter. Mel Gibson didn't win the Directors Guild Award. Ron Howard did for Apollo 13, even though he wasn't even nominated for the Oscar. That is a tragedy. Well, tragedy, but a shame. While Randall Wallace won the Writers Guild Award, but he didn't end up taking home an Oscar. Christopher McQuarrie won for his script for The Usual Suspects. What I'm saying is the guilds were shitty predictors of Academy love that year. Randall Wallace, by the way, who I don't believe was related to William Wallace, although I think he wrote this movie on spec. He found out about this guy, and he's Scottish too, and said, I want to learn more, and I'll write a script. But he went on to write and direct Secretariat, the horse movie that Chris and I covered on Scoring at the Movies last year, I think it was, and We Were Soldiers, which I think is one of the most underrated and heartbreaking war films, and it stars the main man in Braveheart, Melly Mel. But as I recall, was not a big hit, and probably should have been. One more thing about the Oscars is the story that Ron Howard tells on the commentary on the Ransom DVD, so that movie Ransom. Ronnie and Gibson were in the middle of production on that film when the two of them had to go to Hollywood to see which of their films would win Best Picture. That's because Braveheart was up against Apollo 13. Apollo 13 won a couple Oscars that night too. I think for the sound and the editing or something. I love this movie, but Apollo 13 is Ron Howard's best film, and it would have had my vote for Best Picture. Anyway, when they went back to making Ransom, Mel Gibson, being the practical joker that he is, found ways to needle Ron Howard about his own picture beating Ron's for the top prize at the big show. It sounds like it was taken as good fun, not as a mean-spirited thing. Which is so weird about Mel. We all know what kind of horrendous person he is when he's being arrested or when he's mad at his girlfriend. But before we found out about all that, I always thought he was a pretty sweet and generous guy with a great sense of humor. George Clooney-esque. But no, I guess not. Image is not always everything, although we also know that alcohol is a big part of his problem. More accolades. The film is 76th on the IMDb's Top 250. As for the American Film Institute, I love to talk about that. They put Braveheart on 2 of their lists. It was 91st on the Top 100 Thrills. I could have seen it go higher than that. Psycho was number 1, and it was 62nd on the Top 100 Cheers, so most inspiring. It's a Wonderful Life was number 1. If you die painfully rather than tip your hat to a king, then the AFI puts you on their most inspiring list. Braveheart was also nominated for the Top 100 Genres in the Epic category. Epic. The Top 25 Music Scores, the Top 50 Heroes, William Wallace Natch, but really, all of his friends could make the list too. They could have been one big group. The Top 100 Quotes with, "They may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom." And it could have been on either or both of the AFI's main Top 100 lists in 1998 and in 2007. I'm actually surprised it didn't get the votes to be on the genres list as an epic film, and even more that "you'll never take our freedom," that quote, didn't make the Top 100. I think that's a pretty famous quote even today. It's really lasted in people's minds, and I think it was pretty well known even then. So let's get into this epic film then. It's 1280 AD, and we open on several helicopter shots of the Scottish Highlands, showing how green and beautiful the country is. You know what they'd use now? They'd use drones for those shots and probably have even more of them, and maybe even better ones. Good shots, though. Although, ironically, most of this picture was filmed in Ireland, not in Scotland. A Scottish noble named Robert the Bruce narrates and orients us as to who's doing what to whom, although he adds right at the start that historians would say he's lying about all this, even though, as he says, history is written by those who have hanged heroes. It seems that Scotland's king had died without a son, and England's king, Edward the Longshanks, just went and claimed the Scottish throne for himself, partly because Scottish nobles fought amongst themselves about which of them should be in charge. That theme is one that this movie will come back to plenty. Incidentally, Longshanks was apparently called that because he was so damn tall, and of course Longshanks is played very well, excellently well, I think, in fact, by Patrick McGoohan. William Wallace was tall too. He was supposedly a giant of a man, although Mel Gibson isn't even 6 feet tall. So when that guy in the first battle scene says that William Wallace is 7 feet tall, he wasn't that far off of the real guy's stature. We don't meet that version of Mr. Wallace yet, though. Young William's father and brother discovered that a meeting about all the kingdomship stuff ended in Longshanks hanging a whole whack of Scotsmen, including the kids who were there as pages. This was partly a warning to the rest of Scotland, which backfires because Wallace's dad, brother, and some guys we'll get to know throughout the movie aren't cowed and beaten. They soared up to go get some revenge. And it's fitting that I'm covering this movie at the end of March because April will be Revenge Month on this channel, and the big theme in this film is vengeance. It's also fitting that Mel did a cool thriller 4 years later called Payback. Underrated film, I like it a lot. And I might not be in the majority here, but I prefer the theatrical cut of Payback to Brian Helgeland's director's cut. Apparently Mel Gibson took it over in post-production. He was just an actor, he wasn't the star. I don't think he even produced it. But I think what he did made the movie even better. So Braveheart. While the men are away seeing if they can't stick it to Longshanks, young William plays war with his friend Hamish, and even gets playfully socked in the face by the future Brendan Gleeson, which he'll do twice more in the film. Here's a small detail, but I love it. Next we get one of the most authentic examples of waking up I've ever seen. Mel points this out in the commentary, and I've always agreed with him, that James Robinson, the kid playing young William, does that thing we do when we wake up. He struggles to open his eyes. That's what we all do when we wake up. You don't just go, I'm ready to go, start my day. I think he does that better than almost anyone else ever has, even the great actors. And I guess it's this very day that he finds out that he's an orphan, because his da and his bra didn't survive the brawl with the Anglish. We never even meet his mother, so she must have died a while back. It looks like the two Wallaces took a sword in the chest, which for some reason, the adults let the kids see while they're cleaning the dead bodies. Geez, guys, finish cleaning them, then let him get one last look at his slaughtered family. Young Murron, M-U-R-R-O-N, does a kindness after the funeral and gives William a purple flower, which he still has when he turns into Mel Gibson and courts her a few scenes from now. This James Robinson kid is an authentic crier, too. Wakes up well, cries well. Look at this guy, just letting the salty discharge flow in front of a cute girl. Of course, Brendan Gleeson cries when his father dies later, so this film is not opposed to letting males express their feelings in front of others, including other males. Hey, it's Brian Cox. He plays Uncle Argyle. Cox only has 3 scenes in this film, all right here, but he sure does hit a home run with what little time he has on screen. He missed the funeral, but he came to take William off with him to learn, well, everything, including how to fight. It's a shame that Wallace as a grown man spends all his time just taking out the Anglish, because we find out how damn bright he is, too. He could have been so much more than just a killer. Now, it's a shame his dad and brother died, of course, but young William has opportunities with his uncle he never would have had here at home. So years pass while Willie is learning to use his head before he's allowed to use a sword. Back in London, the king is marrying off his not-so-in-the-closet son to the daughter of the King of France. Sophie Marceau plays Princess Isabel quite effectively. She's about as pretty as it gets, and she really sells her passion for Mel later on, not to mention her sadness about being married to a gay man she doesn't love, and who quite obviously doesn't love her back. And by the way, the director probably would have been saying, "You really love my character, you really do." I'm sure he made sure that she looked like she really loved him. The princess is sent by her husband to a war meeting with the king and his knights, where Longshanks announces prima nocte, as he says it, prima nocte. Iron Man says something about this in one of the Avengers films as a joke. At least I hope he was joking. What this is English nobles get first crack at a Scottish bride the night of her wedding, since the trouble with Scotland is that it's full of Scots. The idea is to breed them out. You sick bastard. And that organically leads me to my movie in a nutshell. I didn't just jam this in or almost forget about it like I did in other recent episodes. So Braveheart, in a nutshell. Fuck you, England, fuck you. Fuck you, England, fuck you. From one king to another, well, future king, we meet Robert the Bruce talking to Craig and Mornay, 2 important nobles who will later take a bribe and turn on William. Robert is the leading contender for the Scottish throne, although it wouldn't help his case if everyone knew his father had leprosy, I guess. The old man is there at home, but Robert lies to them about that, so maybe they'd just up and whack the diseased old coot if they saw his condition. I'm not really sure why there's a lie here. But hey, here's our first sighting of the mighty Mel, about 30 minutes into the movie. He's come home from his 15 or so years at Uncle Argyle's. Catherine McCormick is now Murron. Good God, is she pretty, with one of the most beautiful smiles you will ever see. And here's what I still think is Brendan Gleeson's trademark role, despite the Harry Potter stuff and other great things he's done. I like him in Braveheart an awful lot. I'm recording this before the Oscars, but he's up for his first ever Academy Award this year for his work in The Banshees of Inisherin, although the odds are extraordinarily good that Ke Huy Quan is going to win for his performance in Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. In any case, a nomination was overdue for Gleeson. The now grown Hamish and William throw rocks as a test of strength. Basically, it's pre-Olympic shot putting, which the stronger Hamish wins. But he can't manage to hit William with a boulder when Billy dares him to. Billy Wallace. Wallace doesn't even flinch when Hamish throws the rock, but he's armed himself with a small stone that he uses to pelt his old friend with right in the forehead. Brains over brawn, game, set, match. But no more smiles today because Morrison, played by Tommy Flanagan, and his wife don't get to enjoy each other's nudie bits after their wedding, which is the party that William crashed to throw rocks with Hamish, because some English asshole claims prima nocte. I have to say, if you're going to do this terrible thing, it's actually wise to do it so publicly. It's not just about trying to get her pregnant with English blood. It's also about inspiring fear in everyone at that wedding, although also, guess what? There's revenge coming for this later on. What goes around, so comes around. But William's desire for a family, and his quite understandable desire for a family with Murren, overshadows any worry he should have that some English bastard is going to rape her. Murren's parents don't want him to be with their daughter, at least no to know. But they get married in secret, possibly the day after he has his first real conversation with her. Of course, how can a man resist a guy who kept her purple flower for this long, which he must have flattened in a book? Would doing that preserve it? It'd be flat, but would it be preserved? Well, anyway, it's a sweet moment, and I think Murren is in like Flynn after finding out just how romantic this dude is. Hamish's pop, Campbell, played with gusto by James Cosmo, brings Murren's dad over to the Wallace compound and asks William to go to a meeting, presumably to discuss what's there to be done about England. Slick Willie doesn't want any part of this, claiming he just wants to work the farm and raise a family. Hey, Murren's dad even says he can court his daughter if he keeps out of trouble. Didn't I just prove myself? No. William takes Murren out riding again and proposes. I love you. Always have. Want to marry you. Better proposal than what's in Marty, although he's not proposing, but some of the things he says, I talked about that movie a couple weeks ago, this is way better. This is sexy Mel in his prime, saying and doing all the right things. How can you blame her for jumping at this chance? She would have no idea that Mel Gibson, the real man, would often say terrible things to women he loves. So they get married in the middle of the night with just a holy man at the wedding. Not even her parents know they will love each other their whole lives, you and no other. So I guess when he sleeps with Sophie Marceau later in the movie, that ain't love? Or it's just his Lethal Weapon arc in this movie. Namely, his beloved wife is killed, and he struggles with it, but he grows to love someone else after all. I actually like the Lethal Weapon arc, especially as bad as Lethal Weapon 4 is, the end with Joe Pesci at the gravestone of his dead wife. It's pretty sweet. As if Catherine McCormack couldn't be any more appealing, she looks great naked too. No prima nocta for these two. I think Mel's hair in this movie is even longer than McCormack's is. He's got more of it, at least. Considering what's about to happen to Murren in the storyline, it's even sadder to think that maybe she was pregnant with a Wallace baby when she dies because of this night. The English knights figure out what's going on with these lovey-dovey Wallaces and corner her, I guess to get some secondary nocta. This beauty has some beast in her, though, because she slugs the pig named Smythe right in the face, then bites part of his cheek off when he's trying to rape her. Luckily, her husband has a sixth sense about trouble brewing, and Batman's his way out of the scene to save her. Batman! Apparently Mel could have played Batman in the first movie in 1989. He then disguises himself in knight's clothes and gets away, but she doesn't. And by the way, I know, 1966 was the first Batman movie. I was testing you. Partly to teach a lesson to the other Scots, and partly as revenge for what Murren did by fighting back, the head Englishman slices her throat open while she's tied to a post. I always feel heartbroken watching this scene because of the way Murren desperately searches the horizon for her knight in shining armor. But of course he thought she had already gotten away before he even changed into that shining armor. So he's still off waiting in their favorite grove. And let's face it, if he did ride in to try to stop this, they would have tried to kill him, and then her. She was probably doomed, no matter what he did. But Mr. Payback must have figured out what they did, because he returns on his horse in slow-mo and wipes out the whole garrison of bad guys with a little help from his friends. He gets by with a little help from his friends who can take no more. Campbell takes an arrow to the chest, but he soldiers on like the tough bastard he is. He always gets hurt in these big fights. This film won the Oscar for its makeup, which is, sure, because of the blue paint they wear in the first big battle scene, but it's mostly for the blood and gore that make these great kills so convincing. Bev said in our Oscars preview a few weeks ago that the relentless violence in All Quiet on the Western Front felt like torture porn to her. I know she isn't a fan of this movie either, which is a big reason why I'm doing it by myself, so I guess the realism of limbs being cut off and people being stabbed in so many creative ways would feel like torture porn too. Of course, this movie has nothing on the violence in Mel's own enormous hit, The Passion of the Christ. So they bury Murren, and that's tragic, but what touches me even more, really, is when William kneels at her parents' feet. He's not saying anything, but obviously he's begging for forgiveness, which Papa doesn't want to do at first. Then he does touch William's shaggy hair in a, it's not your fault, it's theirs kind of way. By the way, one thing I didn't notice until the third or fourth time I saw this movie is that Murren's dad is on the front lines in the very last scene when Robert is now the Scottish king. Her dad was never part of the fighting before that, I don't think, so I wonder if his wife died at some point and he felt like he had nothing left but to fight. Or maybe he just rallied behind the cause once his son-in-law had been martyred. Anyway, that's at the end. We're still in the first act. Yep, I've got a long way to go on this podcast. Other Scots hear about the attack and join the war party. The Scots go on the offensive, and Morrison gets revenge on the guy who raped his wife on their wedding night, before William tells the rest of the English soldiers to just go home. Tell Longshanks that Scotland is free. There's no way this brutal king will hear this message and obey the warning. Do you think it's remotely possible that an intelligent man like WW thinks that'll be that and the king will let it be? Predictably, the English pillage Scottish towns in revenge, but then they stupidly ride right into a trap where William's men surround them from above. More rocks, baby. I think Mel throws more stones in this film than he swings swords. So now we meet Daddy the Bruce, whose leprosy is not that bad. Not yet. You have to wonder why Robert just hangs out with him in the room like that. Isn't leprosy contagious? Anyway, they plot, but the king in waiting seems like he'd rather go join William and company, who's always fighting with such passion. It's interesting that we go a little ways here without seeing Wallace and friends, because the next scene after this one is between the princess and her lady in waiting. The lady has learned about what's going on in Scotland, and both women moon about how the Wilster fights to avenge what they did to his lady love. It's smart to lay this groundwork that Princess Isabel is so swoony about a man like that, so that it isn't out of nowhere when they end up in bed together. She's already building up in her head that she could love a man like him, so when she actually sees the heartthrob, who even speaks French like she does, she's as sold on his ass as Murren was. Here's one of my favorite parts of the movie, meeting Stephen. Stephen is my name! David O'Hara, is a little off his rocker, the Irishman who just wants to kill the English. Excellent! O'Hara overdoes it in this role, but he gives the movie a lot of life and a sense of humor. Not that there aren't laughs besides what he says and does, especially from Brendan Gleeson, but he's just a funny guy. And even though Mel directs the next scene to suggest that this loony Irishman is about to betray the man he just pledged to help, what he's really doing is watching William's back. He murders the other recruit who was just about to cut William in two when our hero was off alone hunting a deer. And just like that, the loony Stephen is in the circle of trust. And nobody got to eat that deer. We finally get to the red letter scene in this movie well over an hour in. Hundreds of Scotsmen show up for the Battle of Stirling, although they do seem to be badly outnumbered. I love the story about how this was supposed to be the Battle of Stirling Bridge, but Mel said the bridge got in the way. Some Scottish guy's response was, that's what the English found. And the English bring an impressive array of lambs to the slaughter. One of the Scottish guys makes a good point that he's not willing to die just so the nobles can own more land. He and many of the grunts start to leave, but the blue-painted William and his buddies finally show up. Christ, guys, you couldn't have gotten there a little sooner? Well, we needed this dramatic entrance for the drama. To get the grunts back in line, Mel delivers his speech about how they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom. God, I might be willing to go into battle after that, and I'm not a courageous man. Part of the charm of this rallying cry is how he rides around on his agitated horse while shouting at these guys, so the horse is going back and forth, which might be why Mel's horse is so amped up. All the shouting. Alba Gubrath, baby, which apparently means Scottish forever, so it's Alba Gu, G-U, Brath. Top lieutenants on both sides meet in the middle to discuss terms of a ceasefire, but William knows that's pointless. He's going to pick a fight, and they didn't get dressed up for nothing, because the fight is on. First, it's archers firing off a vast array of arrows. They hit some of our guys and take a few of them out, but most of the Scotsmen, who had just flashed their dicks and asses at their enemies after pulling up their period inaccurate kilts. That's apparently another thing about this movie. They wouldn't have been wearing kilts in this time period, but whatever. So they remain defiant. And here's a great payoff. William had said earlier about preparing spears that were twice as long as a man, and we didn't know what he meant, but here we find out. When the English cavalry rides over to trample the boys, they pull up these long spears at the last second and eradicate the horsemen, and unfortunately their horses, right quick. People have been saying for years that there needs to be an Oscar for stunts, and I agree, but the stunt coordinator on this movie especially was a goddamn hero. Also the fight coordinator. The assistant directors too, because they're the people that usually coordinate these kinds of things, the background people and that, and it's the director that works with the frontline stars. If you watch the making of, you'll see that no horses were hurt during this stunt especially. They used mechanical horses and great editing to make it look like the four-legged fellas got all stabbed up. But back in the day, to make a horse go down, they would have tripped them, and often they had to put them down because they broke their legs. None of that happened on this movie. This entire sequence, which is as good as anything in Ben-Hur or Spartacus, is a huge reason why Mel won the Oscar for directing. So now it's infantry versus infantry, and holy God, does this movie find creative ways to kill people. Saving Private Ryan is known for its Omaha Beach ballet of death at the beginning, but this is just about as effective, and it's truly gruesome. Apparently Mel actually cut a lot of the gore out to avoid getting an NC-17. How much worse was what he shot then? So Scotland wins the battle, and Mel gets one hell of a hero shot standing on a rising, covered in blood and blue war paint. Yeah! I can't do it like him. And he gives a look during his yaw that I'm sure some people have seen in real life. Crazy eyes. They knight William, and all his friends are honored too, although not knighted. But the nobles bickering over who's in charge causes the warriors to split. Wallace announces that he's going to invade England to fight the bad guys on their own turf. Mel shares scenes with many actors in this film, but he doesn't appear with Angus MacFadyen, I guess that's how you say his name, McFadyen, all that often until the last 30 or so minutes. Then he gets a lot of scenes with him. And what a moving tribute it is when this great badass tells the Bruce that if he would just lead their people, they'd follow him. And so would I. For someone who should be the general of the entire Scottish army to say that to you has got to inspire confidence. Robert, get with it. This guy wants to follow you. Don't know why. Many Scotsmen are burned alive in the process, but the Alba-Gubrathers managed to sack the English city of York. But as horrifying as those deaths are, it's both chilling and hilarious when Longshanks kills somebody in a more casual way. Maybe not that hilarious, but it is a little bit funny. He throws his son's lever out the window in the next scene. The king can live with his son having a boyfriend, or at least tolerate it, I guess, but he can't handle that same boyfriend daring to speak up. The rage-filled prince pulls a dagger on his dad, but Longshanks kicks his ass and knocks him down. At least the prince wasn't defenestrated too. Small victories? The king talks to himself about who to send to buy Wallace off, also coughing a little right here. See, this SOB is going to die because of germs, not the blade of a Scottish sword. Although apparently in reality this particular king long outlived William Wallace, even though Mel betrays that the king breathes his last labor breath right before William gets his head cut off. Incidentally, I can see why modern audiences would be so bothered by this portrayal of the prince. Mel Gibson has been accused of being homophobic, and that was even before he made this movie, where he had Prince Edward be such an effeminate man-lover. Reportedly, it wasn't even accurate to what the real prince was, or might not have been accurate at least. So maybe it was Mel taking shots at gay people? But I think more than anything, he's just giving something more for the king to do than just say, we have to kill William Wallace, we have to kill William Wallace. Maybe bribe him? Let's kill him, let's bribe him. That's pretty much all the king would be doing otherwise. These scenes are already not as interesting as the time we spend with William and his friends. This gives the king's court some tension and intrigue. William dreams about Murren, so it's nice that McCormick gets a little more screen time. And I suppose it's fitting we see her here because the very next scene is our main man meeting the lady he might not love, but will sleep with, the Princess of Wales. So eventually Diana would have this exact same job. Well, she'd have to deal with someone like William Wallace, I guess. She learns from William just how brutal her father-in-law has been to Scotland. She's even meeting with William in York in the first place because the king supposedly wants peace. But William remembers what happened to those guys who were hanged in a barn. No deal. But these two are falling for each other. He may talk about Murren. Apparently he never does that otherwise. But I think he's starting to wish he could spend some sexy time with this royal. We know she's thinking about that. This movie really does hit that one hard on the head. Longshanks plans to take it to the Scots by hiring Irishmen to fight alongside the English, revealing that he called on their firepower before sending his daughter-in-law to supposedly talk about peace with Wallace, which proves what William already knows. If our man had ever agreed to a peace, Longshanks sooner or later would still get somebody to cut his throat. The good news is that Stephen tells the guys that Ireland is my island, and that pays off with a good laugh later on. Wallace and company barge into a meeting of the nobles. Before he leaves, he asks the Bruce to unite us, unite the clans. And they shake hands, and they should be united at that point. The tragedy, of course, here is that Robert is going to betray William during the next battle. His father doesn't say that's what the plan is, but we learn later that's exactly what he did say to the conflicted future king of Scotland. Longshanks himself shows up at the Battle of Falkirk alongside a man wearing a mask, well, a helmet, that completely covers his face. The 21-year-old me should have realized this was the Bruce, but I don't think I did. Anyway, this battle has some different things going on than the first one did, so I like that, a little variety. The Irish infantry, who are supposed to be fighting for Longshanks, remember, charge the Scots, but everyone stops and they all shake hands. Ah, good to see ya. It's one of my favorite moments in the whole film. It's fitting to mention now that a ton of the extras in this motion picture, even the ones playing the Scots, were from the Irish Army, who I believe also worked for Spielberg on Saving Private Ryan. So this looks like it will be another Scottish victory, especially when they shoot flaming arrows at tar that was pre-laid on the field. That burns the English cavalry alive. A lot of people get set on fire in this movie. Again, the stunts. So many people have to do fire stunts in this film. The two infantries clash, now it's Scottish and Irish together, and it's going great until Mornay and Lachlan sadly lead their two halves of the cavalry off the field. If not for that betrayal, the Scots would surely have won this battle. Some of our favorite Scots get hit with English arrows that rain down on both sides of the fight, including Morrison and Campbell. Campbell just takes a beating in this film. He got hit with an arrow the day Murren was killed, he lost his hand at Stirling, and now he also takes a sword to the chest when he's wildly swinging his impractical mace every which way. William steals a horse from one of the English and angrily goes after Longshanks, somehow managing to ride through all that hand-to-hand combat. The helmeted man tries to defend Longshanks, but William gets the upper hand and would have cut another throat, but Robert is the one under the helmet, so Wallace stops. Mel wasn't nominated for Best Actor, but I think maybe he should have been, or at least could have been, especially for the way he plays the devastation that the man Will said he would follow has gone to the other side. His heart was broken when Merlin was killed. It must be just as badly broken to see this. The ending of the film where Robert redeems himself has made me emotional lots of times, but this scene where William collapses in devastation sometimes has too. Stephen gets William out of there and the good guys regroup, but Campbell dies. At least he got to tell Hamish that he's proud of his son and that he's a happy man. As much as it must hurt to slowly bleed out, there are worse ways to go. To be able to tell your boy that you've had a great life, you're free, and you can die happy, and you're proud of him. The Bruce mopes around, telling his father that he regrets the deal he made. Mr. Face Rot here is making sense, though. If the nobles won't support Wallace, then what are you supposed to do? Put your eggs in the basket of the guy who, great warrior though he is, can't keep doing this forever. He's going to get caught eventually and probably killed. Well, we know that. The legend of WW grows, though, as he kills Mornay and Lachlan for betraying him at Falkirk. Then we hear an old dude saying, he killed 50 men. 50. I always loved that line reading. 50. Another guy claims it's more like 100. Hell, I think they're both underselling his death count. Meanwhile, Longshanks says he'll send Isabel again to talk about a truce, but not before William, Hamish, and Stephen realize they're about to walk into a trap and burn a bunch of scheming English knights alive. More fire stunts. The princess's message did warn them about this plan, of course. William ends up in her bedroom, I guess near where the ambush was supposed to happen. And it doesn't take long before he has sex for the second time in his life. That we at least see. Maybe he had lots of sex when he was with Uncle Argyle. Not with Uncle Argyle, I'm not saying that. When he rides off the next morning, A, you know she's in love, and he might be too, but B, we see that she has even more hair than he does. Marceau's wig is almost all the way down to her heels. Or maybe she had extraordinarily long hair. It was probably a wig, and that's one of the reasons why he went makeup as well. It's makeup and hairstyling. At least now. Maybe it wasn't back then. Time passes, the king gets sicker, and the princess walks around in bliss, and we'll learn later that she's got a tiny little Wallace inside her while being so blissful. William tells Hamish and Stephen that he's now willing to play fair with the nobles, which makes Hamish mad enough to punch him right in the face. Of course, bringing up his dead father Campbell is what pushes the big man over the edge, even though Papa's name was being honored, really. The sad thing here is that this is the last time Willie ever talks to his best friend, although Hamish will tough it out and watch Wallace being tortured and killed pretty soon. Dad the Bruce arranges with Longshanks to corner Wallace when he, for some reason, is going to meet Robert alone. Stephen offers to go, but nope. The story needs for William to be stupid now, I guess. They beat him half to death, which shocks Brucey. He's finally had enough of his dad, who arranged this, saying, "My hate will die with you." And we can assume Robert never sees the rotter again. You're a rotter, Mr. Dad. William won't confess to his mortal enemies that he's guilty of treason, mostly because he never swore allegiance to Longshanks in the first place, so he's due to be tortured to death the next day. The princess comes to his cell and begs him to swear loyalty. He might not even have to be killed, just imprisoned forever. Ah, the sweet life. Sweet life! And obviously her plan beyond that is to free him once the king dies, and then she'd probably backhand her weakling husband across the face hard enough to send him scurrying, and she'd be in charge, and she'd get her man, meaning William, with her. Can you imagine if you're Longshanks and you realize that probably is her plan? Not only would your worst enemy live, but he ends up in the royal chambers, mixing his Scottish blood with her French blood in your English castle. The king is so sick that he becomes bedridden. He can't even speak anymore. He couldn't do a podcast. Isabel begs him to at least not go through with Wallace's torture, but the prince tells her that his daddy had said his last joy will be knowing that William Wallace will die before he does. So she whispers in Longshanks' ear that she's not going to let the prince be king for very long, plus she's got a baby in her belly, and it's not Longshanks' grandson. It's interesting to think that because the top man is about to die, and his hated rival is too, this means this vicious movie never has the two of them appearing on screen together a single time, or fighting, or talking, or anything. They're both at the Battle of Falkirk, but not on screen together. They're hundreds of feet away from each other at best. William is led into the, killing arena? He's tied in such a way that it looks like he's on a crucifix, which we now know is a very fitting pose for a Jesus lover like Mel Gibson. I don't know about you, but I didn't know he was a devout Catholic back in 1995. So first they stretch William with ropes, hanging him by the neck almost to the point of strangulation. Then they rack him to the point of almost tearing him in half. And we see that Hamish and Stephen are there, disguised in cloaks. The first time I saw this flick, I assumed they were going to at least try to save their buddy. Not that I blame them at all for not doing it. They would have had a fuck of a time getting through all those commoners and the guards to even get to William, never mind getting out of there with him. William does not cry out in pain during any of this treatment, and I don't think Jesus does when they're beating the Christ out of him in the Passion either. It's a Mel thing. Tough it out, baby. He also won't beg for mercy or swear allegiance. He just won't do it. They lay him down on another crucifix type thing, and guards cut open his gutty wats and start pulling his intestines out. I'm dumb enough that even with that little thing with the little guys at the beginning of this scene, I didn't get what was going on here the first time I saw the film. I thought maybe he was being filleted to death. What a way to go. Okay, I didn't think that, but I didn't grasp that they were literally tearing his guts out. He just won't give in until he gathers enough strength to holler, "Freedom!" Cutely, it's his last word in this movie, and it's his first word in Chicken Run a few years later. That's an underrated animated film, Chicken Run. Big fan of that one. William turns to a side and notices for the first time that his friends are there watching, but the important thing is he imagines Murren walking behind them. One last look at Murren before he dies. As the axe removes his head from his body, William drops the cloth Murren gave to him on their wedding day, which somehow ends up with Robert the Bruce. If this cloth meant something to William, you know it will mean a lot to Robert. I don't know how he got it, though. And Robert has gone on to finally be made the King of Scotland, with an endorsement from, I guess, Longshanks' son, which will happen on what could be a battlefield. And guess what? It will be a battlefield, because McFadden says the line I like as much as any in Randall Wallace's screenplay, including the famous ones. "You have bled with Wallace. Now bleed with me." Is the line all that incredible? No, but his almost pleading delivery of it is. This man is their king, and he's not telling them they have to fight for him, not demanding it. He's asking if they will fight with him. There are 100 ways you could say, "Now bleed with me," but Angus found the very perfect one. Because men don't follow titles, they follow courage. That and begging. But hey, the king is finally showing some courage. And if Hamish is willing to symbolically throw his sword into the middle of the field, then by gum, they're all in. And I think Hamish might need that sword. Hope he picks it up as he runs past it. As I said earlier, there's Murren's dad on the front line beside Stephen and Hamish. And I guess they won this fight because Mel has his only voiceover line in the whole film. It's always Robert the Bruce other than this last bit where he says, "In the year of our Lord, 1314. So this is a pretty long story. I think it started at 1280 or something, did I say? 1290? Sons of Scotland charged the fields at Bannockburn and won their freedom because they fought like warrior poets. They fought like Scotsmen. I tangled that up a bit, but you get the gist. So the cast. You've got one of the biggest stars of the time in Mel Gibson, playing a Scotsman, and I think playing him pretty well. His accent is fine, even if it slips now and then. Paramount might not cast a non-Scotsman to play one of their real-life folk heroes today, but Gibson said back then that they specifically wanted him to play the lead, even though he went in only wanting to direct. Well, he said that. Maybe he wasn't being honest, but that's what I remember him saying at that time. He thought he was too old, which is certainly true. If the worst thing you could say about Mel Gibson was that he was playing younger than he should have and he took the role from an actual Scotsman, though, well, you're not paying attention to Mr. Sugartits' real-life storyline. 501 episodes in, and this is the first time we've ever covered one of his movies, even though he's been great in plenty of them. I know what he said and done has ruined him for a lot of people. They can never get past the things he said to cops when he was drunk and to his ex-girlfriend when I think he was sober. I get that. I'm just one of those people who can separate art and artist. Usually. It's not like I watch Mel Gibson movies on a regular basis, although I did see Lethal Weapon last Christmas. Partly to have something on while I worked on the creative prep for these podcasts, so I'm doing stuff for you. He's going to direct the fifth Lethal Weapon, apparently, since Richard Donner died and somebody had to take over if Warner Brothers was going to lethally beat that horse to death. Anyway, I think Gibson was a great actor for a solid 20 years. Very emotive, was willing to cry on screen, get very emotional. So I try to avoid dwelling on the fact that I wouldn't want to know him in person. He does seem nuts. I just enjoy the work. I also take some heart in knowing that Jodie Foster, don't forget she's a lesbian, and he was called a homophobe, but they're close friends, I think. And Robert Downey Jr., too, seemed to really treasure his friendship. Maybe if they saw the guy saluting Donald fucking Trump at one of those stupid fucking rallies, they might feel differently. Right, he did that too, didn't he? Jesus, Mel, who hurt you? Was it Jesus? As for Gibson, the director, he's only been behind the bullhorn a handful of times, but that fifth Lethal Weapon and a Passion of the Christ sequel are supposed to be in the works. He seems to relish making his characters take a shit-kicking, whether he's playing them or someone else is. Think of Jesus in the Passion of the Christ. There have been many Jesus movies over the years, and I don't remember any of them being as realistically brutal as that one was. We know about Brendan Gleeson's Oscar nomination for The Banshees of Inisherin this year. Oscar or not, Gleeson has been a terrific character actor these past 28 years. Unlike a lot of his co-stars, his resume is absolutely littered with impressive titles, and he's worked with nearly all the best directors. We also talked back in January about how good he was in his relatively small part in 28 Days Later. I love him in that movie. David O'Hara, kept on being Irish in The Devil's Own a few years later, that Brad Pitt, Harrison Ford film. Then went on to be in another blood and guts macho movie that won Best Picture, and it's got plenty of Irish cred too, The Departed, where he plays Fitzy. And how about this, which I just learned a few days ago? He was born in Scotland, while of course Brendan Gleeson is Irish, so their nationalities are reversed in Braveheart. James Cosmo, who still acts a lot for a man now in his 70s, plays Hamish's dad, Campbell. He was, Jeor Mormont in Game of Thrones, the Lord Commander at the Wall. Catherine McCormick hasn't been in that many films since this, but had a key role in 28 Weeks Later. Gleason was in 28 Days Later. She was in the sequel. And I like her over-the-top performance in Shadow of the Vampire too, so the Malkovich and Defoe Nosferatu movie they made about 20-some-odd years ago. It's supposed to be that Wallace's real-life wife was named Marion, but they changed it so comparisons to Robin Hood weren't quite as obvious. And I have to tell you, I never knew they were saying Murron until I saw her name online. Murron. Patrick McGoohan is Longshanks, and to me, he's one of the unsung great villains in movie history. I might have even put him on the AFI's top 50 villains list. He's probably best known for the TV show The Prisoner, which only ran for about 17 episodes in the late 60s. He's also effective as, not a prisoner, but the warden in the Clint Eastwood jail movie Escape from Alcatraz. I recommend it. Pretty solid, quiet, but good escape movie. And guess what they do? No spoiler alert, it's in the title of the movie. Angus MacFadyen, I think that's how you say that, played Richard Burton in a TV movie. He played Orson Welles in Cradle Will Rock, but I remember him best, other than Braveheart, for his yelly work in Saw 3 and Saw 4. Okay, maybe that's not a compliment. I think he's pretty strong as the Bruce in this, so I'm surprised he didn't end up doing a lot more great stuff. His resume is fine, but it feels like it should have been better, and I've been saying that about a lot of these guys, haven't I? Sophie Marceau went on to be a Bond villain 4 years later in The World Is Not Enough. She started making movies when she was only 14 years old. Okay, so that means she did a lot of incredible stuff, right? Because I think she's pretty good in this, and she's certainly beautiful enough. But mostly what's on her resume are French films, so Hollywood came calling to spoil James Bond's day, but not that often since. And it's certainly not because she and McCormick aren't great looking enough, because they really are. Marceau doesn't get a lot of interesting things to say or do in this, but I liked her character well enough anyway. Gotta love her passion just like his passion. His for fighting and vengeance, hers for justice, and him, I guess. Now here's a guy who has gone on to do incredible work since this picture. Brian Cox as Uncle Argyle. We've covered Adaptation, The Bourne Identity, The Ring, and 25th Hour, all which came out in 2002. He was in The Rookie in 2002 as well, so the baseball one, not the Clint Eastwood cop movie from 1990, I think it was. But that was 2002, The Rookie, which Chris and I covered on Scoring at the Movies last summer, my other movie podcast, Scoring at the Movies. That was during our Summer of Quaid. Of course, what people might always remember this great actor from long after he's gone will be Succession on TV. Great actor, but I hate his character in that show so fucking much, and I want someone to kill him fucking painfully. And that was the cast I'm going to highlight here. I think this is still a great movie after all these years. 1995 was a terrific year for motion pictures. Toy Story, Apollo 13, Seven, 12 Monkeys, Get Shorty, Heat, The American President, and so many more were all released that year. Maybe because there was such competition, Braveheart isn't my number one, but it is in my top 5 of 1995. There are plenty of quotable lines, there's passion and intensity, it's got a sense of humor, and of course the gore in the battle scenes still stands out. Yeah, my vote for Best Picture would have gone to Apollo 13, but I was never bothered by this choice. It's a pretty great film too. That's it for Braveheart. In 3 days it will be time to do another redo of a podcast we did back in 2013. We saw 12 Years a Slave pretty much before anybody else did that fall, and we did a review the night we got home from the theater. But that was off the cuff and we had no context for how successful it would go on to be, especially relating to Academy Awards. So we'll take a proper stab at it as we wrap up Oscar month on March 27th, and we'll actually talk about Lupita Nyong'o, which we didn't do in that Now Playing Project podcast you can find way back in our archives. I kick myself every time I think about 12 Years a Slave for not talking about her during that episode because she went on to win the Oscar, and I love the work she's done since, especially in Us. As for the next time I sit here alone at the table, we'll be in April by then, but that show won't go up on a Friday. Since Bev and I are going to take a week off on April 10th, that's Easter Monday, so, it's a holiday here in this country, at least for me. I get the holiday. Bev doesn't actually, I don't think. But rather than do a show that day with the two of us, we'll take a week off, and I'll post my solo show then rather than Friday the 7th. That way you still get something to listen to on Easter Monday. And that podcast will be our second film in Revenge Month, as young Jane Fonda tries to avenge her father in Cat Ballou. I was looking up revenge movies. This came up. I looked at the description, and apparently it is. I haven't seen it in a long time. I have seen it a few times, but it's been many years. But apparently it counts as a revenge movie, and also every revenge movie, a woman is the one getting revenge. That's basically the idea. In April. This episode will be available on YouTube around the time the podcast goes up. We've been posting each of our episodes this year on the tube. When Bev and I do shows together, you'll see us on camera for about 10 minutes as we make corrections to that week's movie, if we have any. We discuss interesting new flicks we've seen, and we also answer emails and listener comments. These solo episodes I do go on YouTube too, but those are accompanied by just our graphic. But hey, if you're listening to me through our podcast app right now, go check out YouTube anyway, and subscribe. Help us grow our channel. Type at HYES Ellis, ELLIS, into your browser to find our main page. As for contacting us, I am at MovieFiend51 on Twitter. Bev is at BevEllisEllis. Our email address is haveyoueverseenpodcast@gmail.com. Please like, subscribe, share, favorite, tell your friends about this podcast. And if you like a hot cup of something, check out Sparkplug Coffee. Go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES to get 20% off some groovy beans. This has been a long episode, my longest solo show yet, so thanks for your time. I'm glad you gave it up so freely. Freely! And cut.